Hey folks, I'm holding up Paul's latest post on his site called The American Dilemma. And Paul, I take it that what this really is an essay on how the destruction of America is accelerating because of influences, various powerful people, powerful thrusts behind the scenes. So, Paul, what is the American dilemma that seems to be accelerating the American demise?
Well, the dilemma, Larry, is that ethnic Americans um, they face the fact that neither Republicans nor Democrats can represent their interest. The Republicans represent Israel's interest, and the reason for this is that Republicans tend to be more conservative, more religious, and more patriotic than Democrats.
Right.
And in fact, so much so that their opponents often see them as jingoistic. And this Republican mentality toward Israel comes from the what they call the Judo-Christian ethnic, and from the long Cold War against the Soviet Union. Now, in my opinion, the Judo-Christian ethic is an oxymoron. There's no such thing. God in the Old Testament is angry, vengeful, and in the New Testament, he's loving and forgiving. And I think the Judo-Christian ethnic is a propaganda term that disarms Christians from seeing Zionists for what they really are. During the Cold War, the 20th century Cold War, uh, a lot of the focus was on the Middle East. Washington was determined to minimize Soviet influence and to control the oil flows. And Israel was hyped as our ally against the spread of Soviet influence in the oil-rich Middle East. And so Americans have, 50, 60, 70 years of uh, enculturation that Israel is simply an extension of the United States. It's the way we stood up for freedom in the Middle East and so on and so on. So they're not inclined to look at Israel with a jaundiced eye ever, you see, because it's the Judeo-Christian ethic. They're our allies against communism. And now, of course, the communism is gone, so they're our allies against Muslim terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. So the patriotic Americans, they simply can't take any kind of realistic attitude toward Israel. And of course, this attitude was in danger of being eroded by Charlie Kirk because he started off shilling for Israel and then he started noticing and he started becoming an effective critic in the sense of raising questions like he does about other things. He just broadened the area in which he was raising questions and then started to include Israel. Well, this was a huge danger to Netanyahu because Kirk had the youth.
Right.
And so here's the Israeli Zionist state faced with the prospect that the American youth are going to be moved out of the pro-Israel camp.
Yeah.
And since the Democrats are being forced to move out of it because they're the party of the immigrant invaders, the Muslims. The Democrats have Muslim members of Congress, Muslim attorney generals, Muslim mayors. Uh, so it's hard now for the Democrats to be so reliably pro-Israel.
And if they
And
lose
so
kids, that's the next generation of voters that they depend on to keep them in power if they're still on board with the narrative, and that was changing through.
that was changing. So a lot of people have concluded from this that it was Mossad, the Israeli secret police, that assassinated Charlie Kirk. Of course, I have no idea of knowing who was behind it, but I'm just pointing out that people have noticed that this movement was undermining Netanyahu's control over the American public by taking uh, his captured people away from him. And so he had a motive. Well, that's kind of off my subject. So I tried to give two reasons why the Republicans can't represent Americans and why they're in Israel's pocket. Okay. And I think Charlie Kirk's murder will keep him in Israel's pocket. And now, what is it? The Democrats, you see, what is it that that they can't represent normal, ordinary Americans? Um, who do the Democrats represent? They represent those who they allege to be oppressed by prudes and white racists. So the Democrats are the defenders of the immigrant invaders who entered the country illegally, and they champion multiculturalism. Now, a lot of people don't understand what multiculturalism and diversity means. It means the replacement of white people and the enactment of a Tower of Babel, where there are all of these different peoples that no longer constitute an ethnic-based nation.
Well,
So that's what the Democrats represent. They're the champions of sexual perverts.
yeah. I mean, not just in terms of race, white and against black, Asian, whatever. It represents the replacement also of the values, the traditional values and culture of the.
Yeah,
That's the real.
that's right. That's right. Traditional sexual morality is out. You see, the Democrats have normalized all forms of sexual perversion except pedophilia, but they're working on that. You're
Yeah,
already not supposed to use the word pedophile. You have to use minor directed person, minor, like minor of age.
right. Or minor.
And 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 they're teaching young kids in school. I'm talking about 6, 7, 8 year olds how to copulate, give oral sex. Oh, so it looks like they're grooming. The schools are
Yeah.
are grooming the kids for pedophiles. So and they insist on doing this. You know, I guess the Republican school district can stop it, but the Democrats, they don't pay, they just continue it. So, and like you pointed out, they're also warring against Christianity, um, factual American history. You know, we have the New York Times 1619 Project, which teaches that the Americans were founded on racism and that the Constitution was written to uphold racism. Well, this has an effect. Eventually, it erodes belief in the law schools. They start teaching people the Constitution's in the way of progressives. And this has been going on. So,
Yeah.
how can the Democratic Party represent traditional American interests? They simply can't do it. They're excluded from doing it.
We should make a distinction here. You don't have to be a Christian to embrace the Christian values that have become part of the Western culture, the Western tradition, and what helped build the West into what it is today. So you don't even have to believe in God to embrace the Christian values, which have made society so functional in the West until now.
Well, Larry, that might or might not be true. I don't know. That's a liberal argument. My own suspicions are that if you destroy religion, you've destroyed the values it taught. And they they disappear. And so I think that Christianity has pretty much been destroyed. You know, even the Catholic Church, all the mainline Protestant, uh, they're gone. The Presbyterians, the Methodists, Lutherans, what really exists are these Christian evangelicals, and so many of them are Christian Zionists.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean,
In Europe, it seems as Europe and England, it seems as essentially no Christianity. Christian churches get burned down, and Muslim mosques are being built rapidly.
yeah. No, I mean, I
And
understand the point that the continued existence of the church reinforces and helps perpetuate these values that we've all shared, no matter what religion we've been in the
yeah,
in the United States. That's what I'm saying. I mean, Christianity is so entwined with American values that it's one and the same. And even but I agree that, once you eliminate the church as an institution, there's less reinforcement of these American values that made us what we are today.
yeah, and it's not just American, it's Western.
Western, yeah, yeah,
Basically, it was the Catholics that saved Western civilization. They were faced with the Turks overrunning Europe, and they were stopped in Vienna, I think, in the 1600s. And of course, yeah, the church has always stood up for Western civilization. We had the Crusades, you know. But I think the church is essentially destroyed, and of course, all of the pedophile cases against Catholic priests helped.
yeah.
And how many of those were real, I have no idea. Well, anyhow, so the point I've made is I've given the reasons that the two parties simply can't represent Americans. Uh, and so who represents Americans? Nobody. And so uh, it means there's no who defends our values, our accomplishments, our history. Nobody. As far as I can tell, conservatism as a intellectual force is gone. I don't see any, I don't see much sign of it. There are a couple of places where people still think and do serious work, but it's nothing like it was when I was young, when conservatism was trying to make a comeback. There was Barry Gold and there was Ronald Reagan, and there were various foundations that supported conservative professors, and so that they had some way to have research assistants to pursue um, explanations that weren't simply anti-Western, anti-American. I don't think there's any financing for that anymore, or it's very rare. All of the foundations, conservative foundations I knew, are now in the hands of the neoconservatives, and Zionist
Yeah.
Jews, essentially.
As I recall, you were part of the Reagan administration, so even then, Reagan was trying to keep at bay those forces that were trying to eliminate that kind of American.
Yeah, yeah, he was speaking of America as he knew it and as we used to know it.
Right.
And another thing people don't know is he actually fired the neoconservatives who had wormed their way in the administration, fired all of them. Some of them were prosecuted.
Hmm.
Um, Later, the George Herbert Walker Bush uh, regime pardoned them.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about people who were, like high officials in the Defense Department, undersecretaries, things like that, were actually prosecuted. And I think uh, that the Secretary of Defense, Weinberger, was about to be prosecuted. This was the Iran-Contra scandal. This was a neoconservative operation that the liberal left tried to blame on Reagan. Well, anyhow, I'm getting off the subject. The point is that who represents us? And it's not just the Americans that face this question. All of Europe faces it. Who represents Germans, French, the British? I don't know if you noticed the events of last week and so far this part of the week, where the British Prime Minister Stormer said that the anti-immigrant protesters could not use the British flag because the British flag was the flag of diversity, not of the English. He said it's the flag of multiculturalism. In other words, he declared uh, Great Britain to be a Tower of Babel. So you have the Prime Minister of England saying we are no longer a British nation, we are a Tower of Babel, and you protesters can't use the flag because it's not something that represents the British, it represents diversity. Well, now, how is this government going to represent ethnic British? It can't do it. It just said it doesn't. When the Prime Minister of England tells the British people, your government does not represent you, we represent the immigrant invaders. Well, little wonder there's all these protests. I mean, there's massive protests in London, and and the police are being sicked on the protesters.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and who is in charge of the police? A Muslim immigrant invader female.
Yeah.
The Home Secretary is an immigrant invader Muslim.
Well,
And
they're even threatening to arrest an American who goes to Britain who said something on the internet in America that's
yeah,
contrary to their narrative, that they have the right to arrest anybody in Britain who
yeah,
posted something anywhere in the world that they don't agree with. I mean, it's
that's right. And
incredible.
I can add to that, Larry. For years, I was a regular on uh, an English radio program, a British radio program. I was a regular. I was a regular on a British podcast. No more. I'm, I don't hear a word from them. And when I write to ask, hey, have you guys been arrested or have you been silenced? I said, I can understand why you're not inviting me, but I'm just curious about your well-being, or I don't get no answer. So I don't know whether they're in jail or they're just afraid to have an email to me because they'll be used to arrest them. But it shows that either they're suppressed or they're intimidated.
Oh, this leads me to a larger question that I've asked a number of times when we've talked. What is there an overall plan? Is there a certain group pulling the strings and others become useful idiots unaware of the larger plan? Or is it just an accumulation of all this liberal propaganda for the past 50 years where
Right.
people are thinking this way? Or is there a larger plan? I mean, it's international now. To me, it seems coordinated. What do you think?
I don't think there's a plan. It's the product of the interaction of ideas over decades that are unmasking the West. Harvard, Yale, Cambridge, Oxford, they've been unmasking the West for the duration of my lifetime. And what do I mean by unmasking the West? Well, they say, oh, look, the West proclaims these values. Oh, but look what they did. They had colonies, they had slavery, blah, blah, blah. And so they have produced generation after generation of graduates who have been taught to have a negative attitude toward their own civilization, their own society. And that's where you You see it most in the United States in the Democrat Party.
All right. So,
You try to find a Democrat that actually shows any positive response to traditional values. They don't exist.
all right, so Paul,
I think we're on the verge. If the Democrats get back in, I think they're going to criminalize heterosexuality
yeah, yeah,
because heterosexuality produces more aversive racists.
yeah.
And it's inconsistent with replacing the white population with immigrants. I mean, why do you have open borders except to replace the ethnic population? That's why you have it. There's no other reason. We don't, you know, it. Uh, these immigrants are a financial burden. Um, they don't assimilate. They come in such huge numbers, they don't assimilate. They have their own communities. We now have American cities that are predominantly Muslim. Dearborn Heights, I think it's 50 something percent Muslim. Dearborn is close to that. We've got Muslim mayors of cities here. So
And
what happened? We talked about before, Larry. Um, the combination of scholars telling the truth about Western civilization.
all right. So what you're
Right.
saying,
But that together with the Jewish Marxist from the Frankfurt School who fled Hitler and came to Columbia University
right?
and said, we can't rely on the Marxist proletariat. They sold out Marxism, but we intellectuals, we can achieve it by marching through the institutions and corrupting each institution so that it no longer upholds the values of the society. That's the way we collapse the society. So you could say, yes, there is a plan. It's a plan of the cultural Marxists. They were Jews fleeing from Hitler. And it's a combination of their plan together with the universities unmasking Western civilization. And the two together have done the job.
Yeah. So it's an accumulation. It's the end result of an accumulation of extreme liberal, illogical policies that they've all bought into. But Paul, again, I keep asking, they can't be that stupid. They can't be that naive. I mean, a lot of these people are supposedly intellectuals. They deal in logic in a lot of the professions. To me, it doesn't add up how so many of these leaders could be so delusional about all this stuff.
Well, they don't think they're delusional, they're honest. And you and I are delusional, they would say, because you believe all this moral rot. But look, you kill the Indians, you enslave the blacks, you colonize the Middle East, the Africans, they can go on and on and on. They've been going on like this, like I say, for the duration of my life, and it's gotten worse. The last 30 years, it's really just been horrific. Look, just go look at the New York Times 1619 Project. All right, this is an intellectual product. They think they are truthful as opposed to the fake history that the slavers and the exploiters wrote. And so it's a kind of it's become an ideology. It didn't start as an ideology. It just started out uh, being honest. I remember reading some years ago, somebody said, well, look, some historian said, look, here are all these people saying countering our claims that America was founded on racism by saying, how could that be when they fought the Civil War to free the slaves? And they said, well, the same army that overcame the South destroyed the Plains Indians.
Yeah.
So if they're so concerned about one dark-skinned people, the blacks, and no concern for the other dark-skinned people, the American Indians, how do you explain that? And so they went on and actually let the truth out that the Civil War wasn't about slavery at all. It was about the tariff. The South didn't want to pay the tariff, and so Lincoln invaded to make them pay the tariff. Well, this type of unmasking has been going on for so long. It's everything. You can't find one thing, one achievement, or one reform that they look at except with jaundiced eyes. Oh, but you see, that's not the real story. Let me unmask this propaganda front and tell you how really evil and vicious. So this is the way it works, Larry. It's not a question of, and it's not really a question. I'm not talking so much about democratic policies. I'm talking about how the attitude was created to look at your own society and your own history, your own culture, only in negative terms.
Yeah, and
And
Paul,
it was an unmasking process to establish truth. Now, some of these historians were right. The ones that unmask how Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles used American foreign policy for the service of their law firm's clients. This needed unmasking. It's true. So it's not like the ones doing the unmasking were not sometimes correct. And of course, they were correct about it was Lincoln Grant's Union Army under Sherman and Sheridan who destroyed the Plains Indians. And they did it in the most brutal and horrific ways. I
well,
mean, you talk about war crimes, it was massive war crimes.
I don't,
And and yet it was being portrayed as, the great American expansion and savages and so this historian made mincemeat out of it. Well, he was right. So I'm not saying that none of the unmasking was wrong. A lot of it was exactly on target.
yeah, I mean, it's just what's the remedy?
Much of it wasn't, and the result is a frame of mind. I call it moral inversion. It's moral inversion where you use moral impulse to produce immoral explanations.
Yeah. And I also don't see any of these people giving up their homes and property and giving it back to the Indians. Yeah, they say,
No, because the Indians don't have a lobby. So who has a lobby? The Jews and the blacks. And so they can talk about reparations. They have lobbies. The Indians don't have a lobby. And to milk the state, you have to have a lobby. And the black lobby was actually created by Gentiles and Jews. So, and it was part of we have to atone for our evil. Well, of course, as I've said before, I don't think any black was ever enslaved by a white person anywhere. The blacks were enslaved by blacks in slave wars. There'll be two sides fighting each other for slaves. And it turned out that the overall winner was the king of Dahomey. Why? Because early on, he traded slaves to the Arabs for firearms.
yeah,
So his army had firearms, and this was superior technology over spears and bows and arrows. And so the Dahomeans prevailed in the slave wars. And on the coast of what was Dahomey, it's there right now, there's a big arch. And this arch is a memorial to all of the slaves carried to the New World passed through this arch. Well, so who enslaved them? So if anybody owes them reparations, it's the descendants of the king of Dahomey.
Paul, I know you got to get going. I think we're running over time, so we could end it right now and continue with another date or whatever.
Well, I think we covered it. Just to sum up the main, we got off track a couple of times. Um, it, it's we don't like people. We don't have people. We lack people to represent the values and interests of the traditional ethnic Americans. Now, I include in that group the American blacks because they've been here. They're enculturated and they grew up enculturated in the same values I did. What's happened to them is the white liberals have taught them to hate white people. That's what Black Studies does. And but before that, there wasn't nobody was afraid of blacks. They didn't have some astronomical crime rate. Uh, so you can see that these ideas that cause denunciation constantly produce social conflict. And we didn't used to have these kinds of social conflicts.
Well,
When I was a young man, the notion that a bunch of blacks were going to burn down and loot the business centers of many cities would have been thought preposterous. They're not going to do that. Why would they do that? And so these ideas um, have, on the Democrat side, made it impossible for them to represent traditional American values or traditional Western values. And the Republicans can't do it because they represent Israel's interest. I mean, look, we've been at war the entirety of the 21st century. That's a quarter of a century so far. We've been at war for Israel in the Middle East. It's not a war on terror, it's a war for greater Israel. Well, if the Republican Party will take the country to war for Israel, it's our lives, our money. How are they representing us? They're representing Israel. So this is my conclusion. Elon Musk is right. We desperately need a real party that represents Americans. But how can it be financed? It would take Musk's entire wealth, well, whatever it is, $200 or $300 billion. It can't happen. And so it's just the lack of representation for Americans is growing by the year, just like in England, where it has reached the point that the Prime Minister of England represents the immigrant invaders, not the British people. And he says so. He says so. He says Britain is a Tower of Babel. It's diverse. You can't use the flag to protest immigrant invaders. Well, how can the British people be represented?
yeah.
So this is the real problem. It's everywhere in the Western world, and this is the reason it's really collapsing. They have destroyed the belief system of Western civilization. It's destroyed. And so it doesn't make a crap how bad the economy is, or the dollar, or inflation. It doesn't matter because they've destroyed the belief system that these societies need to exist. And so they're in collapse. Look, Trump was trying to do something about it. Look how they turned on him. Charlie Kirk was trying to do something about it. He's dead. So how can you fix it? I don't think it can be fixed. It's just a matter of time. It's, the only future of the West is total collapse. And I think it's happening first in England. And we'll just watch it happen. And you'll live through it. And they'll blame white racism.
Yeah. Well, Paul, another bleak analysis of reality. So,
I would just say another realistic analysis.
yeah, yeah,
You know, there's nothing unusual about the outlook for life being bleak. You know, people have faced all kinds of invasions and overruns and plagues and climate disasters. You know, there's a lot that's bleak. The Americans don't know this because they've lived such a protected life.
yeah, yeah.
But now, with the structure of belief crumbling, they're not going to have a protective life. So let's wrap it up on that. I hope I've been clear enough. Until next time.
Well, next time I know you have to go. Thanks for being with us, Paul Craig Roberts, once again imparting some valuable analysis because of his vast experience in government, going way back from the Reagan administration and knowing, keeping an eye on how the inner workings are with government, which a lot of people don't know. So, Paul, until next time, thanks very much.